Welcome back to this video on the channel. We're going to be looking at the current Derby County squad and going through which players I believe should stay, which players should go, and which players should move out on a loan deal to get themselves some senior men's or even just some football playing wherever they play in whatever league. For me, I think there's a few players who Derby County could look to move on this summer and potentially bring in better replacements. So shall we get into that video straight away? Shall we get into the players who I think Derby should look to move on? So obviously starting off with the players who I think Derby County should sell heading into this summer transfer window. Now, there's only a couple of players on this list and I will explain in detail why I believe these players should go. There's a few reasons for each player and I think it's interesting to see what your guys' opinions are. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments based on the group of players that we currently have. I'm not including Louis Sibley, Craig Forsyth, James Collins, or any of those players that have recently signed new contracts. You may see them pop up in the keep section, but the majority of them I've kept out because obviously it doesn't look like they're going to go anywhere. So we're going to get into it now, looking at the first player that I would sell, and it starts off with Sonny Bradley. Now, I think Sonny Bradley was excellent towards the back end of the League One campaign in helping us get promoted to the Championship, but I think he spent a lot of the season hot and cold. I think there was a lot of periods where he wasn't quite able to get into the side, wasn't able to put in valid performances, in my opinion. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below or in this top corner to stay tuned for all my latest Derby County, EFL and Euro 2024 content coming up on the channel. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit the like button as well. Let me know your thoughts on Derby County's squad heading into the transfer window. Who would you keep? Who would you get rid of? Let me know everything down in that comment section. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that the likes of Jake Rooney, Ryan Niambi, Craig Forsyth all picked up injuries, I personally don't think Sonny Bradley would have been a part of that back three toward the back end of the season. Don't get me wrong, had some excellent performances, especially later on at home where he bagged a brace. But for me, I think he's probably going to end up being a squad player this season, maybe even less than that, with the returning Jake Rooney, the returning Ryan Niambi, and potentially new players coming in that area. It's going to be really interesting to see how Paul Warne handles it. There is rumours of interest from, I believe, Charlton Athletic to go back and play for former Luton Town manager Nathan Jones. So it will be interesting to see how this one develops. For me, I like Sonny Bradley. I think he's a really good character, but I just don't think he's what we're necessarily needing at the moment. I think we need to improve that back line to make sure we carry on with our good defensive solidity heading into this Championship campaign. Now, going on to the next player who I think should move on, and I think a lot of people may agree. I really like Connor Washington. He's got a really good work rate. I think last season we did not see the best of him. Obviously, as a result of injuries, he came in injured, then picked up an injury on international duty, and we only really got to see an unfit Washington, which I don't think really gave him a good account for himself. And it's disappointing, but ultimately we haven't paid a penny for him. He has another year left on his contract, and I think if we can cash in, move him out, I think it would be a really good decision by the club. I think we need to strengthen that forward department anyway. If Collins stays, then I think we don't need Collins and Washington at the club for me. And although obviously we don't have decisions on James Collins as I'm recording this video, it's one of those things where I think we can do better than Connor Washington and James Collins. And I know you don't want to go into a season or a pre-season with no strikers on the books, but I think we might be better off going in without one and coming out with someone better than starting the season with someone along the likes of Connor Washington. I think there will be options for him to go elsewhere, in my opinion. I think he has got quality. I think he's a top-end League One striker, and I think if he had been fit last season, I don't think James Collins would have played as much because obviously early on in the season when Washington was fit, Collins couldn't get in. Same with Martin Waghorn. So for me, I think Connor Washington's one of those who I'd move on. Maybe I'd personally look to move him on permanently, but obviously if it's a loan deal for a season where majority of his wages are covered, I wouldn't mind that either. But for those two players, I think I just think that we can do better in those areas, and I think there's going to be options out there for us to utilise and us to go out and pick up. We've obviously seen in the defensive areas, there's obviously the likes of Deshaun Bernard potentially available. I don't believe he's signed a new contract at Sheffield Wednesday yet, and that's just something which I think the club should be looking into. Obviously, they've been on abroad scouting trips recently, so it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes with obviously abroad players coming in. But for me, the two players who I would move on is obviously Connor Washington and Sonny Bradley. Now, we're going to get into the players who I wish to keep at Derby County. Now, the first one is quite obvious. We don't have another keeper option. So for me, Josh Vickers has to stay. It makes no sense to move Vickers on. For me, perfect decision to keep him. Obviously, with Joe Wildsmith and Scott Loach moving out this summer, it's going to be really interesting to see how Paul Warne does decide to balance the goalkeepers. Is he going to go out and get another number one? Is he going to go out and get someone to play second fiddle to Vickers? Or is he going to go out and get a keeper who we don't really know where he's at, and it's a potential keeper? Now, for me, I think I'm going to get onto it later in the video when I talk about the loan players, but I think we have some really good keepers coming through the academy, so I think it's got to be a smart decision by Paul Warne not to block that pathway, but also not to make it so that we've got a 16-year-old as a backup goalkeeper. I think that's like the worst case that could happen. Now, obviously, Jake Rooney, I thought he was brilliant at the start of last season. I know he didn't really get a massive set of games and a massive sample size to look at, but for me, I thought in the games he played, I thought he was absolutely phenomenal. I thought in the Bolton game, up until the point where he got injured, I thought he was fairly good as well. And it's one of those where I just think he's going to grow and grow and grow as he gets older. And it wouldn't surprise me if come the back end of this season, we have a back three of Rooney, Nelson and Cashin, because I do think that Jake Rooney has all the attributes to be a really good, top quality championship ball playing centre half, and he's really composed on the ball. He likes to get on the ball, and it's really good to see a defender that likes to defend as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Paul Warne handles this one. Obviously, with the return to pre-season, Jake Rooney should be back within the squad. I believe he will be doing probably prehab work with the S&C coaches and stuff like that heading into the season. But it will be interesting to see how he comes back for the friendly games and things like that, and how his minutes are managed. And then obviously, I think this one's obvious. I don't really have to say much on Curtis Nelson. Phenomenal season last year. Absolutely should stay, and I think should start the season in the heart of the defence. And that's just something which I believe. Obviously, you can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But for me, Curtis Nelson absolutely has to stay at Derby County. And again, Erin Cashin. Now, there's a 50-50 on this. Obviously, he has signed a new contract, I believe, up until 2026, maybe 2027. And I personally believe that he should stay. But the 50-50 caveat is a big bid. Now, we rejected 4 million we accepted a 4 million bid with a year left on his contract when we didn't know if he was going to renew his contract or not. And for me, I think with him having now up until 2026, 2027, I think he's probably more in the ballpark of 12 to 15 million pounds in value. Now, some people might call me a bit deluded with that price tag, but for me, I think he's absolutely worth every penny of that. I think he's got so much experience at the heart of the defence at such a young age, and he's got incredible talent. He's really good on the ball. He can ping a pass. He can play a short pass. He can intercept a pass. He can read the way opposition teams play. And for me, I do think he has everything about him to go on to be a Premier League centre half. Now, I personally believe he's got to be 12 to 15 million pounds. No less. I don't think he's worth more. But obviously, if we can get more, absolutely. And I want him to stay. I think it'd be massive for us to stay to keep that defensive solidity heading into next season. But if a big offer comes in, we've got to be smart about it. We can't be turning down 12 to 15 million pounds for me. We spent too many years. I think we turned down 7-8 million for Louis Sibley from Leeds United a few years ago. We turned down 4 or 5 million for Max Bird one season. Similar numbers were touted for Jason Knight going to Burnley a couple of years ago as well. And we don't want to lose out on that money anymore. We've gone past that stage for me. So for me, it's a 50-50 on Erin Cashin. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I obviously want him to stay, but a big bid could obviously change the way that I look at it. Obviously, Callum Elder, I don't really think we got to see the best of him last season. Obviously, struggling with injuries when he came in, then struggling with injuries throughout the season. I think he's got a lot more to show and a lot more ability than we were able to see last season. Now, you'll have to let me know your thoughts on Elder down below. I've seen a few people maybe suggest moving him on, but for me, I think unless we keep Louis Sibley, I just don't think it makes much sense to get rid of Callum Elder. I don't think there's enough quality fullbacks out that we can just go and pick up that aren't going to cost massive amounts of money. So I think it's important that we keep Callum Elder. Obviously, Ryan Niambi signed a new contract back in January, I believe, until the end of the 2024-25 season, I think. I think he's a massive player. Absolutely should stay at the club. I think if we have a good season and stay up, I think he'll sign a contract extension. I think his versatility, being able to play right back, right centre-half, right wing-back, is absolutely pivotal to what Paul Warne tries to do. I think it opens up more opportunities for other players to play and to get more attacking players on the pitch. So I really like Ryan Niambi. Definitely think he should stay. We then go on to Joe Ward. I think he had a bit of a turbulent season, but towards the end really came into his own. And a bit differently to Sonny Bradley was Joe Ward had spells early in the season where I thought he was excellent. He then obviously had that heel injury where I think he ripped the fat pad off his heel or something along them lines. And I think he came back and just couldn't get back in the side as a result of Kane Wilson's form, Mendes Lang's form. Ryan Niambi was playing excellent at the time. And don't get me wrong, he had his moments last season, gave away a couple of important penalties which cost us points, which arguably, looking back, cost us the title. But we won't dwell too much on the past. I think Joe Ward has a lot to give. I think he's got a lot to offer, especially in those forward areas. And it gives an option, if we play him at right wing back, to play Ryan Niambi or Jake Rooney as the right centre half and give Mendes Lang more of a free role if he's playing sort of the right hand side of a free. It gives more opportunities for the squad, or it gives Kane Wilson the opportunity to be more free in an attacking, flowing sense. So for me, I think Joe Ward has to stay. I think we then have 3-4 really good options at right back, right wing back, and I think that's absolutely massive heading into a championship campaign. Obviously, we then go on to Kane Wilson. I think his performances last season really do speak for themselves. I think he had an absolutely magnificent season, and I think he's only going to go from strength to strength. Obviously, a young player, still got a long way to develop, and I think he's going to have a really good championship season coming this season. We obviously then go on to Liam Thompson. Obviously, just signed an extension. I do think he's going to stay. Obviously, we've not mentioned Craig Forsyth. I'm not sure if I put him in the slides or not, but similar to Liam Thompson, absolutely has to stay around the building. We then go on to Tom Barkhuizen, another player who signed an extension. Now, obviously, last season he came into the season not knowing if he was going to be in and around it, not knowing where he fit within Paul Warne's system. But we got to the mid part of the season, February, March time, and I thought he was excellent playing in behind Dwight Gale and Nathaniel Mendes Lang. You can obviously let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Obviously has a mass of championship experience with Preston North End. So for me, I really think Tom Barkhuizen should stay unless there's obviously a really big offer. Obviously, he got the contract extension for a reason. I think he hit his performance clauses. So it's one of those where it might not have been Paul Warne's decision, but I think it is the correct decision to keep him about the place. It offers us more options in those forward areas. We then go on to Corey Blackett-Taylor, obviously signing this summer from Charlton Athletic after his loan spell in the second half of the season. Absolutely should stay. I don't think it's even questioned whether he's going to stay or go. I think he's going to be an absolute pivotal part to this championship campaign. I think we saw the best of him when teams weren't sitting in and weren't letting us come on to them, sort of thing. I think he was excellent against Portsmouth. He was excellent against Blackpool. 2 really good games for me, and I think it showed what we can expect from him in a championship setting. I think he was absolutely mega heading into those games. I think if it wasn't for a few little niggles, I think he would have probably hit the ground running at this club. But he came in a little bit injured, which seems to be a theme with Derby County signings. Now, Corey Blackett-Taylor, for me, absolutely has to stay. I think he's got a big role to play next season. I do think we need to add in those forward areas, but for me, he has to stay. Nathaniel Mendez-Lang, I think, speaks for himself. I do think we need to go out and pick up some younger wingers and forwards, because obviously, yes, Kane Wilson can play in those forward areas, but I think he's more of a right back than a right winger. So for me, I think everyone in those forward areas, apart from Blackett-Taylor, is over the age of 30 or 30. So for me, I do think that's an area that Derby County do need to develop. Do need to find some players. Obviously, we've got players coming through the academy, but they're still really, really young. The likes of Cruz Allen, Niall McAndrew, who can play in those sort of central midfield and forward areas. You've obviously got a lot of players getting released from the under-21s heading into this season as well. So, like, how they develop over the course of the summer is going to be really interesting. But for me, I do think we're missing players in those attacking roles that are those younger age groups. Obviously, heading into this season, you've got Mendez-Lang, who's over 30. Tom Barkay's now, I believe, 30 now. And then you've got Connor Washington, 30. They're looking at renewing James Collins, who's over 30. The only real under 30 players we've got is Blackett-Taylor and Dejon Brown. Obviously, they're looking into renewing Louis Sibley as well. So it's one of those where I do think a lot of development needs to be done in these areas. I think there's a lot of youngsters who really do need bringing towards the club. We need to sort of lower the age profile of the squad. I know that's part of Paul Warne's plans that he's been talking about over the past 18 months anyway. We saw it a little bit in the summer of last season, but it's really hard to find those peak age players within sort of the free transfer budget that we had. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that's handled. But obviously, Nathaniel Mendez-Lang has to stay. I'm then going to go on to talk about some players who I believe should go out on loan. Now, we've got a lot of players in the under-21s, under-18s, who in my opinion could really do with a loan spell. I've not pictured everybody because it would go on forever. But starting off with, we have Darren Robinson. Now, I personally would like to see him in and around the first team, but I do think a loan spell would be much, much better. Now, you can sit on the bench as much as you want, but for me, he's got to get game time. I think loaning him out to a League 2, League 1 club, getting him sort of not necessarily guaranteed minutes, but where he's going, we know he's going to play and he's going to fit in. I think that would be really interesting to see how he gets on. Obviously, he's coming into that age now where he's getting to be an important stage of his career where he really needs to find his feet in men's football. Obviously, he's just signed a contract extension, and I think it's going to be massive that he does get the opportunity to play wherever he is. Now, do I think he can break into our first team? I think it really depends on the summer window. I think there's a lot to talk about around Darren Robinson. I think he has masses of ability, but he's not been given the chance under Paul Warne to really show that, in my opinion. He was given opportunities under Liam Rossini and Wayne Rooney. Obviously not many, but he was a lot younger then. And I do think it's time now that he needs to find his way into a first team and then potentially break into our first team, whether that be in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. I think that's the best option for Darren Robinson. Then Tyrese Fornah. You probably noticed that I haven't mentioned him so far. I do think midfield's an area where we definitely need to strengthen, and I think Tyrese Fornah had a spell around December, January time where he was pivotal to what Derby County were doing. He was coming off the bench and really making an impact on games, and I just felt that he didn't do it enough. And he came in and started well, then he had a few sloppy games and then sort of like disappeared off the face of the earth. And was it injury? Did he have problems off the pitch? What was the situation? I don't know. It'd be really interesting to obviously know that situation, because it's obviously hard to judge him when obviously he played enough games to have a sample size, but I don't think he played enough where you can really judge him. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. I do think a loan spell probably to League One would be a really good idea. But then I could understand why we'd keep him around the building because obviously he has got ability. He's shown he can do it at championship level. before with Reading. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that one does go about. It's one of those for me where it's a 50-50 toss of a coin. Do you keep him? Do you loan him? I wouldn't sell him. I think that wouldn't be a smart decision. But I would definitely look into potential loan options where he'd probably get more minutes than he would here. Obviously, I do think Derby County are going to bring in masses of central midfielders over the course of the next few weeks. So make sure you do keep an eye out on Derby's social media, on my YouTube channel, to keep up to date with all the latest signings. Now, we're going to close this out with a couple of youngsters now. Now, Dejan Brown, I'd made a video on him a few months ago when he really hit the ground running at Gateshead. Obviously, he had a sort of a turbulent start where he couldn't get into the team, but then once he got into the team, he was sort of managed into the team really well by their manager, and I think they did really well. And he really went on an impressive run. He scored, I think it was 10 goals. It might have been 8 or something like that. He could have scored a hat-trick, scored and got an assist at Wembley, scored the winning penalty in their cup final. And I think he showed that he's capable of playing at a higher level than what he was playing at. I personally would want him at an EFL club on loan this season. Probably top end of League Two, looking towards that area to get him within a top side where he's going to get minutes, get goal scoring opportunities, and really see what he can do within a good side. Now, I personally would do a 6-month loan with an optional extension for the rest of the season, or potential recall clause depending on how he's performing, so that we could either, depending on how we're doing, bring him into our first team or potentially move him into a higher division. I personally think he's got to take that step up to League Two first. But if he gets a good opportunity at League One, I absolutely would not turn that down at the start of the season for 6 months. But we've got to make sure that it's the right move, and he's going to be able to get into the team and really play games, because if he's not playing, it makes no sense why he's out on loan. He could have done the same with us, with our really good facilities, and he could have developed further along with probably better players, you'd probably argue, if you're sending it to a League One, League Two club. So for me, I think Dejan Brown, I think he has to go out on loan for the first 6 months of the season, but then reassess it in January. Or even a case of, depending how our season starts, how our summer is, what forwards we get in, he could potentially end up starting the season as one of our first team players, one of our starters maybe, and that would be really interesting to see. I think it's a bit risky to do that though. I would prefer some experienced forwards in the club and someone who's played at championship level before. I think it's hard to judge where Dejan Brown's going to be at this point of the season. So, well, at this point in the summer, obviously he'll probably play pre-season with us, and I probably think it'll probably be a case of going out at the end of August. Mid-August sort of time, when we've started our season, we've got through pre-season. I think that's probably when he'd probably move to a new club on loan, and I do think a loan is the only option for Dejan Brown. Obviously, I do believe he's got a contract till the end of next season. It might be 2026, but I believe it's 2025. I know there's rumours of interest from the likes of Sunderland and Newcastle since his spell at Gateshead, and it's going to be really interesting to see how all that does develop, because a really good offer, what is that for Dejan Brown? Not really played senior football yet. He's going to go to Newcastle and Sunderland and probably do the same thing as he's going to do with us, where it's a potential loan, maybe sit on the bench. So it'll be really interesting to see how that one does develop. And then obviously we've got other few youngsters who, in my opinion, would benefit from loan spells out. Now, I've done videos on Cruz Allen and Kai Robinson over the past few weeks, as well as the likes of Niall McAndrew and Dan Cox, all players who I think should potentially get loan spells. Now, I personally believe these lads need men's football experience at non-league clubs. I think the best thing we could do for them is get them out to those clubs, get them opportunities at that level to really prove that they're capable of playing at men's football. Obviously, there's really high hopes for these players. Obviously, youth internationals. Jack Thompson has played youth internationally for England, and I do think it's a massive couple of seasons for these players. Obviously, signing their professional contracts, got the backing of the club. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do get on heading into this season. Obviously, I do think they should spend pre-season with us, whether it be the 21s or the first team. That obviously is a decision to be made by the coaching staff and things like that. But I think it'd be really interesting to see these players in and around the first team setting for a friendly game or something like that. Obviously, there's other players like Ben Radcliffe who I think could potentially do with a loan spell, maybe even the likes of Niall McAndrew, Justin Ogatoglu, I think his name is. There's a fair few youngsters coming into their second year scholar who I think potentially need that option to go out on loan and get first team football, probably non-league level, just before the National League, National North and South things. I think they should go out and get some football there. That's just my opinion. You can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Now, we've looked into a whole host of players at Derby County so far. Now, obviously, there's a massive time to go for Derby County in this transfer window. There is a long way to go. There's a lot to do. I do think we should keep the younger players with us throughout pre-season and then get them the opportunities to play first team football. Obviously, the 21s and 18s is really good to develop, but I think there's a lot of players who maybe need that men's side of things to build their physicality and to show where they need to improve. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Paul Warne and Jake Buxton, Matt Hale and Mark Thomas deal with this summer transfer window. There's obviously a lot to do at Derby County. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you have not done so already, and I'll catch you in my next video. Make sure to go and find me on TikTok, pictured here, and Twitter, pictured here. These are the places where I'll keep you all up to date with all my upcoming videos and my thoughts and feelings around the Formula 1 and football weekend.